So can you trust TV news? And if not, what can we do about it? This all in the wake of Chuck Todd finally realizing, oh my God, the sky's open and the sun came out, realizing that Republicans come on his show specifically to gaslight people, to lie to the American people and to him. Incredible. Check it out. Ring the bell. Leave your comments and share it with your friends and subscribe to our channel. I mean, Chuck Todd has come right out and said, you know, we're being used for propaganda. And that's a pretty amazing statement. What's most amazing to me is that it took him all these years to figure it out. I mean, you know, that the Republicans, when they come on his program, aren't just there to say, oh, well, you know, we believe in small government. You know, it would be a good thing if government just got out of the way. You know, the old Reagan rhetoric, right, which at the time there were those of us saying, you know, what he's saying really is deregulate these big companies and let them throw more poison into the air so they can make more profit even though we die of cancer. You know, and the media didn't get that. You know, but at least back then it was like, oh, and we think lowering taxes will actually increase revenues. And you know, the rest of us were going, it's never happened in history. But, you know, Chuck Todd's predecessors, you know, David Gregory, and before him, Mr. Russert, and, you know, on it goes. They were all like, okay, you know, next question. So Chuck Todd appears to have had an epiphany. And which raises an interesting question. If Chuck Todd's realization that the Republicans come on his show, on Meet the Press on Sundays, and not just his show, you know, obviously all the Sunday shows, because they come on and they all say essentially the same thing. And more often than not, they are either flat out lies or distortions of the truth that are functional lies. His realization that he's being used this way, you know, what's going to come out of it? And how does this serve America, having such a dysfunctional news media? I mean, do you trust the news now? Do you trust the weekend shows? Do you find yourself yelling at the TV? Or have you given up on them? You know, and what do you think that Chuck Todd and the rest of the hosts of these Sunday shows should be doing with their guests? I mean, I've noticed that there are a few hosts, you know, principally Joy Reid and Rachel Maddow, who will occasionally, and I mean like maybe once a month or something, very rarely, but nonetheless will occasionally have a Republican or a conservative on, and when they start lying, they will immediately say, well, you know, that's just not true. And, you know, and I've seen this on CNN too. You know, Van Jones, you know, do that a number of times. But the problem that Chuck Todd and these other guys have, and it's going to be a huge problem going into this election year, because so, you know, there's objective lies and then there's kind of subjective lies, like when somebody says, well, I think Joe Biden is corrupt, for example, you know, and really they're, you know, what they're trying to say is that they've bought into this Republican story that Joe Biden somehow, you know, got rid of a corrupt prosecutor in Ukraine because the guy was looking into his son, which was not true. I mean, it's just on its face not true. And yet there's 1,400 ads over on Facebook right now from the Trump campaign that say that. It's a lie. And so, you know, these guys are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because in their minds and in their theory of broadcast, these are what are called guest-driven shows. Not to pull the curtain back too much or get inside radio and inside television, but basically there's a couple of different kinds of shows. There's what's called host-driven shows, which is what Rush Limbaugh does. He very rarely has guests. He takes a few calls, but mostly you hear what he has to say. And that's pretty much how I run this show. The host-driven shows, you know, are and that's what Rachel Maddow does on television. The first half hour of her entire show, she typically doesn't have a single guest. That's a host-driven show. You build a relationship with the host. You know, it takes a lot of work to do a host-driven show. They're the most difficult kind of shows to do, because you've got to do a hell of a lot of prep. But anyhow, there's host-driven shows. Then there are guest-driven shows, which is like the Sunday shows, where, you know, the show only exists because of the guests. And then there are news-driven shows, which is like the news shows that you see in the morning on TV. Poppy Harlow and Jim Sciutto, or however he says his name on CNN, those kind of the news-driven shows. And then there's caller-driven shows, which is like what Ed Schultz used to do, where all he did was just take calls all day long, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. And his slogan was "Where America Comes to Talk." And I miss Ed. Ed was a good guy and a friend. He died of a heart attack, year before last, I guess now. And he's been gone for a while. But anyhow, that was caller-driven. Those are the four kinds of basically talk radio and television that are done. And caller-driven is what you see on C-SPAN, where they take calls from listeners for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. So if you're running a guest-driven show like Meet the Press, and you can't get guests, you're out of business. I mean, Rachel Maddow could do her show and never have a guest. I frequently do this show without a single guest. We're going to have 2 guests today, and both of them are going to be on for 12 minutes. I mean, out of 3 hours of broadcasting. So, but if I was doing a show like Meet the Press, where all I did was interview people, it would be a flaming disaster if people would not come on the show. And that's what Chuck Todd is looking at. If he calls these Republicans on their lies, they may stop showing up for his show. And if they stop showing up for his show, and only Democrats show up because he's only willing to put on people who tell the truth, then it's going to look like his show is buying 4 Democrats. And he's going to start losing Republican viewers. They'll all start migrating to Fox. On the other hand, if he tries to call them on their BS, they'll just come up with new lies. So what's he to do? Well, I have a few suggestions. I posted some of them over on Facebook this morning. On our every morning I write a little paragraph around 5 o'clock in the morning, and Louise puts it up on our Facebook page for the Thom Hartmann program. And what inspired me was a piece that Hunter wrote for the Daily Kos, in which he raises these same issues and offers some of the same suggestions. He actually goes a little farther than I do on this. And so his suggestions are, number one, and my suggestion as well, number one, don't run these shows live. Why does Face the Nation, Meet the Press, why do these shows have to be live? Why can't they be recorded an hour before air? So that the word Chiron is an inside television word, but it's in use so often that most people know what it is. It used to be called lower thirds, or they have been called lower thirds as well. It's called a Chiron because this machine was invented back in the 50s by Mr. Chiron, I guess, that would put text on the screen. But anyhow, it would give, if the show was pre-recorded, it would give the producers or the fact checkers or the people, working on the show a chance to look it up and say, oh, Ted Cruz is lying through his teeth. And then the Chiron could say, this is what Ted Cruz is saying is not true, or could actually dispute it. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is to try to balance the liar with somebody who's going to tell the truth. Now, that's pretty much what many of the shows have gone to. In other words, if they've got a Republican on, they'll have a Democrat on as well, or they'll have a panel or something like that. Or I think what Chuck Todd does is he goes to a panel afterwards. But if you're trying to balance it, then you're giving credibility to the liar by having the non-liar on there, which is kind of a tough one. You could ask serious follow-up questions. You could stop, just say, hey, wait a minute. I know that's a lie. We're going to stop right here. I'm not going to ask any more follow-up questions until we dig into this. Now, are you lying because you came on this show specifically to tell lies? Or are you lying because somebody's paying you? Or are you lying because you've been told that if you don't say these things, the president will attack you and you'll lose your next election? Why are you saying this, Senator Cruz? Why are you saying this, Senator Graham? Kellyanne Conway, why are you saying this? What's in it for you? Now, that's typically never done, because that's considered a personal attack, right? That's an ad hominem. That's basically what you're saying to the host or to the guest. And I've said this a few times to my guests, and I've learned that it typically really upsets them, number one, and number two, they don't want to come back on the show when you do it. So it's probably not the best way to do it. But boy, would it be delicious, right, if they did. So, and I get conservatives on the program all the time. In fact, we try to get conservatives on the program just so that we can provide people with a template for how to talk back to crazy Uncle Ralph at Thanksgiving dinner, or the guy in the cubicle next to you who listens to Rush Limbaugh all day long. So anyway, you know, the state of our media, and the reason why I raise this, I mean, because there's so much going on, and I'm going to get into a lot of it in just a minute, you know, hate crimes and all kinds of other stuff. But the state of the media is such a crucial issue right now because this is an election year. And the lies are flying fast and furious right now in social media, on Facebook and Twitter in particular.